Hi again. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening for the Lower Christmas Tree Hill Undergrounding and Evacuation Improvements virtual meeting, our first meeting on this topic. I'm Dave. I'm part of the consultant team working with the town, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it right over to RJ to get us started. So over to you, RJ.
All right, thanks, Dave. So RJ Asuko, Public Works Director, and also with my team, I have Nick Cartagena, our Senior Civil Engineer. So we're glad you could take time out of your busy schedules. We've got a lot to cover, and I think we're excited about this project. So we're gonna, next slide, please. As part of our agenda, we're gonna cover just welcome and overview. We're gonna do some team and partner intros. There's been a good amount of background dating back to at least 2019. So we're kind of recap that for anyone who wasn't involved in that past effort, including the climate adaptation assessment. And then we're also going to cover some of the other things that are happening in the world of wildfire mitigation. And we have folks from Central Marin Fire Authority here to help present on those. And then we'll bring it back to kind of talk about what this project is focused on, and maybe some of the things that are being handled by other agencies such as Central Fire and others. And we also have PG&E here to assist with any Q&A at the end. So next slide, please. So really today's purpose is to introduce, engage, and follow up. We want to acknowledge the prior work and some of that long-term planning effort that was done, and then go into kind of more specifics about the project goals that we have for this Lower Christmas Tree Hill undergrounding and evacuation improvements project. More importantly, we really want to get feedback from you all as to, are some of these draft goals that we've identified, are we hitting the mark, missing the mark? Is there something that should be modified? Really, this is going to be the foundation for the project moving forward. So it's important that we are all on the same page as we move forward. So we've gone out to a RFP process. We did a series of our consultant interviews, and we believe we got a great team here working with you all. So we've got Becky Dower from BKF. They're the civil engineering team and surveying and others. We've got David Parisi here from Parametrics doing the traffic engineering. And we have Dave Javid and his team from Plan to Place really assisting with the public engagement. We also have folks from Central Marin Fire Department, Todd Lando, and potentially Ruben Martin, our chief, and also folks from PG&E, and got Greg Wright from PG&E, and we also have Corinna, and they'll be kind of rounding out the partner group to assist with questions as we move forward. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave Javid from Plan to Place.
Great, thank you, RJ. So real quick, we just want to let you all know how we're going to be facilitating the conversation here this evening. We do have the chat currently open, so if you did have any thoughts or comments you wanted to drop into chat, feel free to do that as we go through the presentation. And those that are process related, we'll try our best to go ahead and answer in chat. Others we'll bring to the forefront as we get to the Q&A after the presentation. But yeah, so please do use that resource. And when we get to the Q&A, you'll notice that you're all muted right now just because we want to make sure that we don't accidentally interrupt each other. But we'll go ahead and allow you to unmute yourselves and comment when we get to that point. And then if you have called in, I didn't see any numbers coming through, but you could also use the *9 feature on your phone to use that same hand raise when we get to the Q&A. So before we get started, what we'd love to do with you all now is to do a quick poll. And this is just to get a sense of kind of who's in the room with us, maybe get a sense of maybe where your concerns might lie related to this topic and what you've done to date to prepare yourselves. Just again, so we can get a quick gauge of those in the room. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we have this fun dynamic tool that lets us kind of gauge and see the input in real time. If you do have a mobile phone with you, feel free to bring that up to the screen and capture this QR code, and you could follow along that way. If not, you can open up a separate screen on your computer and simply go to menti.com and put in numbers 1270668, all of which will pop up on the next screen as well. So no stress if you haven't got there yet. What I'm going to do though is stop sharing real quick and then bring up a separate screen so that you all could follow along here with me. Okay, hoping you all could see that okay. And I'm going to go ahead and move us into this quick survey, and then we'll get back to the presentation. So the first question is just really a fun icebreaker, just to kind of get a sense of what you love about living in Corte Madera. Obviously, feel free to put anything you want there, but this is a quick opportunity to give us that information, and then we'll move on to the next question. Hoping you all are following along here with us. Awesome. People love the town. I'm probably going to go ahead and move us on here. This was just meant to be a quick one. Small town feel, great. Proximity to San Francisco, awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just get us right into the actual poll. We'd love to know kind of, we did a bunch of different ways, resources to reach out to you all as we're going to continue to through this process. And we were curious how you heard about the workshop, whether it was the mailer, the A-frame sign, social media posts, word of mouth, or other. Okay, great. Looks like the A-frame signs are working well. Mailers got to you. All right, next quick question here. How long have you lived in the Christmas Tree Hill neighborhood, assuming that most of you are from that neighborhood? Great. Okay. As you could all see on the screen here, hopefully along with me, we have a pretty good mix of residents here, which is great. And then we want to ask a pertinent question is to rate your level of concern about evacuation plans in your neighborhood, given that that's going to be one of the topics here this evening. We were hoping to get your input there. Okay. Obviously, maybe that's why you're here today, as it looks like there is definitely some concern. Excellent. Okay. And then lastly, before we jump into the presentation, we were wondering what measures you have implemented on your property to reduce your risk of fire and improve evacuation. So that could be home hardening, vegetation management, evacuation planning, or other. And we'd love to hear what that other is as we get into the Q&A as well. Okay, great. Looks like you all that are joining us here this evening have done quite a bit of planning ahead, which is great to see. Okay, excellent. That was it. I don't want to take any more of our time. Great answers are still coming in. You can continue to kind of lob those answers in as we go. So I am going to shift screens back here. Thank you so much again for taking that survey with us. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and reshare here and get us back into the meat of the presentation. And back over to you, RJ.
All right. So just thought we'd start by providing some background on kind of the work that's been done prior to now. So 2019 to 21, there was a lot of workshops and engagement and meetings that led to a climate adaptation assessment being approved by our town council in spring of 2021. That was really a long-range planning document that really, looked at our town as a whole and our vulnerabilities to climate change and other factors, not just wildfire mitigation, but even sea level rise and drought and other things. So that's still, a relevant document, and I think has some good information in there. We'll be kind of focusing on some specific goals as we, talk about this project in particular. That effort then kind of led to us establishing what's called a Rural 20 undergrounding district, which is a a district created within the PG&E process that identifies an area that we want to underground electrical power lines. So that has been approved by council, and we'll go into specifics on the limits of that work. We've also done a underground study that was done by a consulting firm to evaluate, which areas might be prioritized in town to potentially reduce our risk in Corn Madera to things like wildfire and how they could be started. And then next slide, please. So here's a map of the undergrounding district that was approved by town council. You'll notice it's really focused on where all of the roads funnel at the base of Christmas Tree Hill. And, as you all who have lived there and lived there for many years, this is, where the vast majority of ingress and egress points lead. We know there's one other back exit, but it's not as direct and not as traversable. And so this is where we want to make sure that, we don't have ignition and power lines down and other things obstructing those that need to evacuate in such an emergency. So we want to hear about, thoughts you have, and also understand, not just the undergrounding options, but potentially some other things that PG&E either has been working on since, we last got together in 2021. They have already rolled out several technology improvements to help on this this effort, and some that are also in the works that perhaps they can shed some light on. And then this will ultimately go into our town's project design, amongst other elements such as evacuation permits and road improvements and other underground infrastructure that is needs to be addressed. Next slide. So here's kind of 4 areas that we feel are appropriate for dealing with the hillside, and we've kind of broken them down into 4 groups: wildfire risk mitigation, and really we see that being led by Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, Central Marin Fire Department, and PG&E. Evacuation, that's definitely a town mission to maintain our streets and improve them so that they are fully accessible and can meet the needs of our residents, and also emergency services in times of need. Protection, that's obviously our Central Marin Fire Department. And then really this education collaboration, I think the town sees that we play a role in that, and also Fire Safe Marin is another one that's out in front, kind of bringing this to the forefront. So next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Todd Lando with our Central Marin Fire Department team to really show what they're working on and how it benefits neighborhoods like yours with respect to mitigating for fire and other things. So Todd, please take it away.
Thanks, RJ. Appreciate this. I'm going to quickly run through several slides as an introduction to the various wildfire risk mitigation programs that Central Marin Fire Authority is engaged in that impact or potentially impact residents of Christmas Tree Hill. And I'm going to move through some of these slides quickly. Some of the numbers here, it's giving you a good illustration, but you don't necessarily need to get into the details. If anybody has questions about specifics or wants more detailed information, please reach out to me. Email is fantastic, and I can get back to you and dig into the numbers in these slides. But an introduction to our program, this is our annual budget. This is really for the last fiscal year. And I wanted to give you some ideas of what we put into projects in your area. in the 23-24 fiscal year. The majority of the funds that we spent on wildfire mitigation projects came from tax measure C, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, which we're an active participant in. That equates to about about $1.6 million in total was spent in and around Corte Madera on these mitigation projects. So the total of about $2.3 million. The town of Corte Madera through Measure F contributes some funds that we use for vegetation management and wildfire risk reduction projects. Our defensible space partners, which include all of the surrounding fire agencies from Southern Marin and Kentfield on the south and north of you, all the way up to Fairfax and West Marin with Marin County Fire. We work as a partnership in inspecting and properties and educating the residents on wildfire risk that we identify on their own properties. We break up some of these funds into local mitigation projects in both Corte Madera and Larkspur. And because of the Christmas Tree Hills nature immediately adjacent to neighborhoods in Larkspur, a lot of the work that we do in Larkspur will have a direct impact on those residents in Corte Madera. And we also bring in funding from the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority through what's called the CORE funding program. In this case, it was about $278,000 that we used for evacuation route improvements in the last fiscal year in and around your neighborhood. And the next slide, please. And the next one. I'm going to give some information on our defensible space evaluation program because it's one of the pieces that I know has impacted each and every one of you. You've all seen our inspectors in and around the neighborhood, and virtually everybody on Christmas Tree Hill has at one point in the last 4 years opened one of their defensible space evaluations online. We send teams of inspectors out. We have 30 inspectors working full-time for us during the fire season, both before and a little bit after the fire season. We just wrapped up the 2024 inspection season and completed about 20,000 inspections in Marin County, including quite a few in your neighborhood. The next slide. Our inspectors use some custom software to do the inspections. You've seen them out in the field. They take photographs. They pinpoint individual hazards, and this is all intended to provide really education and information to homeowners to help you adapt and mitigate hazards that we identify on your own property. I know there are a lot of questions about enforcement, and I'm happy to talk about that. But what I want to point out is that just in Corte Madera and Larkspur, in the last year, we identified just over 15,000 hazardous issues on properties. We inspected 1,800 parcels. We conducted 1,100, almost 1,200 re-inspections of properties, and we base those on the hazards that we actually find on properties. We conducted 48 voluntary abatements. These are abatements of properties that needed specific assistance to deal with significant hazards that we identified. The next slide, please. So in your neighborhood and directly adjacent in this last year, we conducted over 1,500 inspections. We measure, and this is just an illustration of some of the metrics that we look at. We look at how much engagement we have with residents. We want to know how much time residents actually spend mitigating issues on their property. We look at the effectiveness of our inspections, whether we're able to access the property with the permission of the property owner, or whether we're only able to inspect from the street because we weren't able to make contact with the property owner, or in a very limited number of cases, the property owners actually decline to allow us onto their property. We look at the impacts and the effectiveness based on what we actually see in the field from these inspections. The next slide, please. Just to give you some greater detail into what we found in your neighborhood. This is specifically looking at the Christmas Tree Hill and the Marina Vista neighborhoods in Larkspur, which really are really one and the same in a lot of ways. We found about 6,000 what we call defensible space violations in those neighborhoods. And upon our return after our initial round of inspections, we found that about 1,200, really pretty close to 25% of those violations had been corrected by the homeowners. That's a fantastic rate of return for us. That's better than most communities and neighborhoods in Marin, and really shows a high level of engagement by the homeowners there. We also break down the effectiveness of other types of inspections. So we'd conduct these inspections through our defensible space evaluation program, but we also conduct inspections based on a request from individual homeowners in some cases. Some of these are conducted as part of the resale, or when a property exchanges hands in a real estate transaction. Some inspections are triggered by complaints from one neighbor to another, or in other cases, it's from complaints by the firefighters who might be driving through your neighborhood and see issues that we need to take care of. Some of the inspections are related to construction projects, new construction, remodels, that sort of thing. So we do have lots of different points of contact in the neighborhood to help us identify potential wildfire hazards and give you guys ways to mitigate them. The next slide, please. So in addition to the defensible space evaluation program, which is really, our bread and butter, is where we have the most contact and I think achieve the greatest results in the community, we do quite a bit of direct vegetation management in the community. This is a look at the 23-24 fiscal year in all of Corte Madera and Larkspur. So not all of it was directly adjacent to Christmas Tree Hill, but quite a bit of it was. I'll show you some maps in a moment. We treated 141 acres. We disposed of 4,400 cubic yards of chips, chipped materials, vegetation that we feed through the chippers. We call it treated, but we conducted vegetation management along 6.6 miles of roadway. And we're right back to that $2.292 million in total funding for that fiscal year in all of our programs. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you, these are some images. Some of these you might have seen before, but they're all directly adjacent or on Christmas Tree Hill. And I want you to recognize that some of the conditions that you see today aren't what it looked like 4 years ago before the Measure C was passed. We've done a significant amount of targeted vegetation management on and around Christmas Tree Hill in specific locations that we've identified either through wildfire hazard modeling or through our own analysis and recognition of the potentials for wildfires to impact Christmas Tree Hill from different directions under different weather conditions. This is right at the top of Summit, near the Corte Madera Ridge Fire Road. Next slide. Same view from a different angle. This was taken immediately after the first pass of vegetation management was conducted, and we've now returned to this location 3 times for follow-up maintenance. That's a maintenance and ongoing, maintenance as vegetation grows back is critical for us to maintain the work we've accomplished. Next slide. This is a look at a communications facility at the top of Christmas Tree Hill, top of Summit. It provided access to us, protection for critical communications, emergency communications, and your own communication, your ability to receive text messages and other, evacuation notices, information about wildfires when they're occurring all depends on our communications infrastructure. So we spent quite a bit of time and effort over the last 4 years to harden and ensure that those communication facilities can survive. Next slide, please. I want to point out, and this is critical, that the vegetation management work you see throughout the central Marin area, even into the southern Marin, Mill Valley side, can have direct impacts on your neighborhood. When we look at the areas of greatest vulnerability in Corte Madera and Larkspur, some of the areas that are relatively far from your own neighborhood are the ones where a fire is most likely to originate. So we're doing work from Larkspur to Fairfax, so along the Corte Madera Ridge, into the Blythedale Canyon and Mill Valley, and all of that work potentially impacts a wildfire's ability or reduces a wildfire's ability to reach your neighborhood. So this is a holistic approach. We're looking at lots of different places, lots of different potential ignition sources that can bring a fire to your neighborhood. The work that we do elsewhere, especially to your north and east, which is the direction that a wildfire is most likely to approach from, can have a big impact on your own neighborhood's survival during a fire. Next slide, please. The Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. This is a project that you've probably heard quite a bit about. We've done some presentations directly to your neighborhood and the community about this project. It's now become about a $9 million project. We anticipated that it would take 4 years to complete, and we're looking at probably being real close to that, 4 to 5 years in total. We believe it's going to take to finish all 38 miles of vegetation management in a fuel break that was strategically located on the outside of the built environment in the entire Ross Valley, starting in San Anselmo and extending all the way through Christmas Tree Hill and across the freeway to the bay on the East Corte Madera side. It's a total of about 1,100 acres of vegetation that'll be treated when we're finished. It impacts about 1,700 individual residential parcels. And a lot of the work over the last 3 years was conducted with grant funds that we received from CAL FIRE in a $3 million grant. Next slide, please. This is a detailed look, a little closer look directly at the Christmas Tree Hill neighborhood, which I've outlined in the dotted red line here. This shows the immediately adjacent areas that have been or will be treated by the end of next year in and around Christmas Tree Hill. Tremendous impact. This is looking at a significant potential fire scenario. It will limit the spread of a fire from the Mount Tamalpais watershed as it potentially backs down on what we call the turnaround days, or days when the wind's actually blowing out of the west towards your community. We recognize that this is one of the most likely scenarios for a significant fire. It's a fire that happened already in your community, although none of us remember it, in the late 1800s. It's a fire that we anticipate could happen again, and this will provide a tremendous amount of protection as a fire backs downhill. This type of fuel break would not be effective for, let's say, an area like Paradise in Northern California that was impacted by a wind-driven fire. But your neighborhood is less at risk of that type of scenario than it is from a fire that becomes established in the Mount Tamalpais watershed and backs down into the community. So we've, really using some sound and unique science, identified the most likely scenario there and identified a potential fuel mitigation project that can help slow the spread of the fire as it enters the community. This is only effective when residents have done the work that we've asked them to do through our defensible space inspection program. So this is all really a coupled approach. It requires the work at the outskirts of the community, like this project. It requires work from each individual property owner. It requires cooperation from all of our partners, including the Marin County Parks and Open Space, the town of Corte Madera, the city of Larkspur, the PG&E, and our communications partners, all really to make this whole thing work. And we've had great success working with everybody. I appreciate it that this tonight's program is really a part of this ongoing effort. That's our final slide. So happy to take questions at the end here tonight, and hope that we've answered some questions about what is being done in your community.
Great. Thanks so much, Todd. And thank you, RJ, for taking us through the first set of that presentation. RJ, did you want to take this, or are we going to turn this over to Nick, or do you want to take this first part here?
I'll take this first.
Great.
Thanks again, Todd Lando. He's we're lucky to have him in our community. He's a wildfire mitigation specialist and comes with many years of experience. So thanks again for being here and for all the work you're doing. So I wanted to kind of transition right from work that was done in 2019 to 2021 through the climate adaptation assessment. So these were some goals that were identified back then. And so under wildfire risk mitigation, we have analyzed town's wildfire risk, electrical undergrounding and system hardening. And then under evacuation, we had enhanced transportation network capacity, create policies to encourage evacuation preparedness and early evacuation. And then under protection, investment in new equipment and technologies for fire protection. And then under education and collaboration, enhance community outreach and education, update planning documents, budgets, and programs. And from what you've seen so far, just even from Todd's presentation, and we haven't, gotten to the work that, PG and others are doing, you'll see that this overall effort requires a lot of different agencies focused on different things. And so we wanted to kind of now focus in on this project in particular and highlight the areas that we believe our project can focus on and deliver. So that is under wildfire risk mitigation, the electrical undergrounding, system hardening within the limits that we've established in our boundary map, under evacuation, enhanced transportation network capacity, and we'll show some images later on some of the ideas that have come up. And then education and collaboration, as tonight, we're getting some good information from Central Marin Fire Authority, and we'll get some more through Q&A from PG&E, and obviously the town will try to provide resources to everyone who's engaged in our process. Next slide, please. Specific to kind of more infrastructure-based project goals, this is the list of items that had been identified in 2021. So improve and widen portions of Summit Drive, connect and improve Lower Summer Fire Road, widen Redwood Avenue where appropriate, improve town maintained steps, lanes, and paths, develop strategic pullouts, further evaluate California Lane as a possible connection point to Cormidor Avenue, and improve Middle Summer Fire Road. And so now we're going to kind of look at what this project will handle. And it really doesn't mean the others aren't going to be pursued, but the fire roads, for instance, will be more on Central Marin Fire's radar to lead that effort. But we're going to focus on, how can we widen Redwood Avenue where appropriate, introduce strategic pullouts so we can have, vehicles coming down as potentially emergency vehicles are coming up, and or just increase overall capacity to get off the hill during an event. And then we are still going to look at, California Lane and what opportunities it may or may not have with respect to ingress and egress for the general public, or maybe just ingress and egress for emergency vehicles. So I think there's some analysis to be done there. Next slide. So this is the initial concept, and call it project limits. And so there's a lot of different layers here to go over, definitely refer to the legend. But the electrical underground you'll see is really focused on the bottom portion of Redwood. It ties into a short segment of Portola and goes up to Edison, about a block and a half. That project alone is estimated just over $1 million. And that's really just the undergrounding aspect of that project. We have road widening where possible. So we're really going to focus on where Edison and Redwood converge and really see, how much capacity we can provide there without, while still maintaining, various pedestrian facilities and other things. But really, as people come off the hill, it's important to really improve that, what could be a bottleneck for the project. So we do have some existing pedestrian pathways, but I think Central Marin Fire will speak to it later about what they think is the best way to evacuate, and they've kind of and talking going into it later, really want to see people in vehicles because it's a safer place to be in a wildfire. So although we have done recent work and continue to do work on the steps, lanes, and paths, that will for the most part be handled through parallel efforts rather than this project specifically. We're going to look at on-street parking and just see how parking plays a role in evacuation and see if there's anything we need to do as part of this project to optimize evacuation for everyone by, evaluating our parking areas and maybe parking constraints potentially on, concerning red flag days or other things. So that's, part of our plan here. And then, yeah, road widening and sightline improvements at, some of these tight corners, and really just allowing multiple, vehicles or, to be going down at the same time as, emergency vehicles getting up to, where they need to assist with mitigating fires or serving others in need. So with that, I'm gonna jump the gun, but I'm gonna turn it over to Nick to go over a little bit on the project process and next steps.
Yeah, great. Thanks, RJ. So yeah, my name is Nick Cartagena. I'm a senior civil engineer with the town of Corte Madera, and I'll be the project manager for this project moving forward. As RJ mentioned, we're early on in the project, and we're in the background and research portion of the project where we're doing surveying and traffic analysis and data gathering. And obviously we are engaging you, the community, to give a first glimpse of the project and the scope that we're looking at. But we really are coming to listen and to get feedback and to answer questions and kind of make sure we're on the right track. And I know the map that was on the previous slide that RJ went through. There's a lot of information there. We'll pull it back up during the Q&A portion because I'm sure there'll be questions and we can refer back to that. So right now we're in the fall of 2024. We're doing the background and research. This coming spring, we'll be further analyzing the undergrounding options and all the project design alternatives. We anticipate working on the draft design from the spring of this coming year through the summer of 2025. And by the end of the summer, closing on the end of 2025, we'll have a draft design ready to go, and we'll start preparing for the next year where we're going to engage another RFP request for proposal effort to finish out the final design. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it back to Dave. Obviously, we're going to be here for the Q&A portion, and we'll be, filling in more details as we get into that.
Great. Thank you, RJ and Nick. Yeah, so most importantly, as RJ mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we're really here to hear from you all. If you had any questions or comments based on the information we just shared, or about the project in general, this is your chance to give us some initial feedback here. We didn't see a whole lot coming in through the chat channels. There's a question about the project scope itself that got answered that you all have access to. But if you had any other questions or comments that you'd like to share now, you could simply use that hand raise feature at the bottom of your toolbar, and we can go ahead and unmute you. You can comment that way, or if you'd like to leave us any questions or comments in chat, there would be an opportunity to do that here as well. So I don't see anyone running in line here to to ask any questions, but we'll pause here for a sec to see. Okay, great. Peter, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen so we can all see each other as well. Peter, I see your hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the work on this. I think it's great, all of it. I'm a big fan of the undergrounding. I guess my comment is I would encourage you guys to go bigger, particularly pushing PG&E. I mean, they're spending a ton of money on what seems to be kind of drop in the ocean sort of stuff. They send their huge crews out every year to trim trees off the wires, which they wouldn't have to do if they're underground. They've replaced, I don't know, half a dozen poles in the neighborhood recently, which again, if you're underground, you don't have to replace poles. They're, you know, they have the storm damage that again, they have to come spend a lot of money on. So that's comment one. And comment two is, so they're spending money, and I just think undergrounding, you know, I'd rather have big spend once than a lot of little spending over the years. And then, you know, we picked living lower on the hill in part because it was close to the Berkeley fire, and we didn't want to be caught far from the bottom of the hill. And my point here is, I mean, I would encourage you to go to Hillpath or to California Lane, just because I think pedestrian egress is incredibly important. And you know, you mentioned a parallel path, but I think keeping those pedestrian lanes clear is really, really important. A lot of the people that have died have been stuck in cars, and that's why you're doing all this work. But it's downhill, and for those that are able-bodied, it seems like keeping Hillpath and keeping California Lane clear and accessible could be really, really valuable to saving a lot of lives as we look at potentially bad outcomes.
Thank you for that, Peter. I don't know if RJ, do you want to respond to any of that?
I think I heard something that, you know, spot for Todd to jump in about, you know, what an evacuation could look like and kind of how he would speak to that. And then also some questions that PG potentially can answer about just their current undergrounding program.
Well, you know, right off the bat, it's important to correct the misconception, Peter. You know, I hope you hear this the right way, but the statement that a lot of people have died in their cars is factually incorrect. Since 2015 in California, more than 1 million people have evacuated during wildfires. 200 people have died during wildfires. None of those people died in cars on pavement at all. It really is just a misunderstanding about what's happening. The vast majority of the people who died in and around their homes. They never evacuated, and every single one of those people who got in their car and made it to pavement survived without fail. You know, the images during the Paradise Fire of hundreds of cars burned up, those cars burned up in some cases hours after they had been abandoned by people. And frankly, the people who got out of those cars were at much greater risk than the people who stayed in their cars. And I could go on and on about this point. We've conducted a study, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. We looked at the coroner's records for every single person who's died during wildfires in California since 2015. So it's really important to understand that the safest place you can possibly be during an evacuation is in your car. And that's something that we're taking into account when we're planning these projects on Christmas Tree Hill.
Okay, I mean, I guess I was going based more on the Berkeley fire where, you know, I don't have the data, but I think there were more people in cars in those fires. Now, I don't know if things have changed since then.
Yeah, no, I happy to address that. On Charing Cross Road during the Berkeley fire, 13 people died in their vehicles on one stretch of road. A very unique scenario and a very unique situation. And in that case, getting out of the cars and evacuating on foot was not an option. And those people would have died either way. You know, it's tragic, it's terrible, but getting out and evacuating on foot was not an option for those people. And I'm not saying that people have not died in their cars in the past, but I am suggesting that getting out of the car is always a worse option.
What if you can actually not ever have to get into a car? I mean, you're familiar with Christmas Tree Hill. I mean, these pathways, Hillpath, the ones off Edison, California Lane, relatively short distances. And I don't know. I mean, they seem pretty short way to Town Park. Big span of green space, you know, watered lawn and water.
I wish it was watered lawn and water, but it isn't. So my statement stands: the safest place to evacuate, the safest mode of evacuation is in a vehicle. It provides the greatest protection for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, this is great information, and some of it may even counterintuitive, and I think that's part of our education on this project. And so, you know, thanks for those questions. You know, good questions. And before we move on to the next one, is there someone from PG&E that maybe wants to speak to the current undergrounding efforts and kind of when that program is set to conclude, and what's maybe some of the work you've done in the past and what's happening in the future. Oh, Greg, you might be muted or.
Greg, you should be able to unmute here. Looks like you're unmuted, but we can't quite hear you. I'm not sure if you're having some technical difficulty.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. So my name is Greg Wright, Division Operations Specialist for Marin and Napa counties. Born and raised in Marin, went to Redwood High School, so I'm very familiar with your area that we're talking about tonight. Basically, as you know, well, you probably don't know, but PG&E does follow a wildfire risk model. And currently, right now, we're on version 3. That's from 2022 to 2026. We look at all our high fire risk areas and basically, start from top to bottom. As you know, Christmas Tree Hill was not included in that through 2026. We do have a version 4 that's currently in play with the PUC and our energy office, Office of Energy Infrastructure Services. There is talk about a couple of Marin circuits being in play, but of course the PUC has ultimate decision making in that and will determine the step forward. We do have 2 options for Christmas Tree Hill, one being a system hardening option, one being an undergrounding, and it is the PUC that will determine our steps forward, if even allocated as a high fire threat risk and sits in our model. So we definitely understand what's going on up there, but as it stands right now, Christmas Tree Hill is not in our risk analysis. I don't know what the variables are that determine that, but we do hope to see that new version 4 risk model coming out in Q2 or possibly Q3 of 2025, and that will determine what Marin circuits are getting worked on for new undergrounding. Can I answer any other questions for you, David?
Can you clarify kind of what some of the system hardening improvements are? I think people are pretty familiar with the undergrounding option.
Yeah, so the PUC, to be honest, has looked at both our undergrounding efforts and our overhead, and they are leaning more towards an overhead solution, and that includes both our partners down there in Southern California, Edison and San Diego, and they love the system hardening overhead solution. Of course, that entails larger poles, tree cover, tree wire, larger poles, etc. So I think what we're looking for right now is whether or not Christmas Tree Hill will be subjected to either an undergrounding and or an overhead system hardening construction. We don't know that. We will not know that until next year sometime. So that will be something that we will get back to this group with the plans. But yeah, we're pretty entrenched in trying to either do an underground or an overhead solution.
And while you're kind of covering kind of the general strategies on PG&E, maybe you can touch on the recent work on microgrids, and then also speak about some of the misconceptions about undergrounding with respect to communication utilities and other things, and how that plays.
Sure, good question, RJ. So if PG&E is asked to underground up on the Christmas Tree Hill, we have to understand that we have a joint utility pole agreement with our partners in telecommunications, that if we did underground, we would basically bequeath our deeds or whatever to the utilities that have telecommunications. And what that would encompass would be that PG&E would come in, we would take all of our electrical infrastructure down to the telecommunications portion. So whatever, roughly 8 feet off of each pole, and then you have your telecommunications poles. Those would remain if we were to underground at PG&E. So as far as aesthetics go, certainly there would still be the poles, the wires that were there before. However, the high electricity wires would be undergrounded. So that's something a lot of people, it's a misconception that everything goes underground. We do ask our utility partners to underground with us. It's a huge expense for them, and a lot of them are not willing to embark on that endeavor with us. So just wanted to throw that out there. The second question you had, RJ, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just microgrids and some of the technology with shutting down. Yeah.
So we do have microgrids. We do have one installed in our partner county up in Napa, in Angwin. We also have one in Calistoga. Those are there to basically segment a certain portion of that circuit, so that certain crucial, gas, markets, post offices, etc., can remain in power with a microgrid, while the rest of the community is on a power outage. So that is something that we look at. It is a kind of a collaboration between both our internal PG&E folks that run microgrid construction and our DPW and individuals that want to warrant that microgrid for their area. It's not something that we do a lot of, but there are certain cases that we do. And I don't know if Christmas Tree Hill at this point.
Yeah, and I think I maybe was using the wrong terminology. So there's the automatic shut off. That was the one that I actually
that's our
shut on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's our EPSS. That's our enhanced power line safety settings. Those were enacted about three years ago. And those are safety settings that anything that touches the lines, be it a veg strike, an animal strike, or anything that touches our line, that system is programmed to shut off within 1/10 of a second. And so we do that in a lot of our HFTDs. Those are our high fire threat districts that were created by CAL FIRE in the state of California about 10 years ago, probably 12 now. But those determine whether or not we enact an EPSS settings in certain areas. I have not looked at your outage data, so I can't tell you how many EPSS outages you've had year to date. But that has reduced our risk of fire, I think, in 87% of all our modeling currently. And those typically run anywhere from May through November, depending on, fuel, dry, wet weather, and so on and so forth.
Great. Well, thank you for those comments and for the response. I see some comments coming in through chat as well that we're trying to kind of address as we go here. I think some of them have been addressed, but I wanted to come back to the hand raised as I see 4 now, and then we'll kind of come back to some of the chat questions as well. I think some of them might be overlapping. So Penelope, I'm going to go to you next, followed by Courtney. Thank you so much for your patience. Penelope, you should be able to unmute yourself. Welcome.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for all the work too. I've noticed a big improvement up here. I want to put in my support for the California lane because there are so many cars and homes up above there. There's no way they're all going to get off just the way it is now. And I have a question on the widening of Redwood Avenue. After Portola, as you're going uphill, a lot of the homes are so close to the street. If they widen, then their parking is gone. Is do you have some solution for that? Or would you be widening the other side of the street?
So I think at this point, we still have some analysis to do. I don't know, David, with our transportation engineer, if you want to comment on anything that you observed to date, knowing that, there's still a lot of technical work still to be done.
Oh, thanks, RJ. I'm David Parisi, traffic engineer with Parametrics. We are reviewing the streets all throughout Lower Christmas Tree Hill, looking at parking, the lane widths that are available with or without parking, some of the constraints in intersections, and we'll be coming back with some recommendations, particularly for evacuation, for egress and access also for fire vehicles, but more to come. That's a great question.
And I think it was in the chat and just mentioned there, so I'll discuss California Lane. So that was, one of the reasons Christmas Tree Hill is a priority area for town is really there is the main egress point at Redwood, and then there's one that's much less used. So limited to almost one point where all the traffic funnels down to, and we look at our other hillside neighborhoods, whether it's Chapman or parts of Marin Estates, and they've got 3, 4, 5 egress points, and for a lot of those reasons, their risks during evacuation are significantly less. So in an ideal world, we'd have multiple areas to add and connect and assist with the capacity to come off the hill, but based on the built infrastructure, it's pretty limited, and even California Lane has its own challenges with the steep topography. So at this point, there's no decision made, just other than it needs to be studied further. We want to know, if it were for emergency vehicles, how would that benefit things? If it's for the general public to evacuate, how safe is that given the steep grades? And then, do some light modeling on the benefits and start to outweigh, is it worth, making any of those improvements? So, yeah, it's part of our scope, and unless, we hear that it's, not worth pursuing by, folks on the Hill. So, with that, we'll hand it back.
Great, thank you, RJ. I do think we're kind of knocking off some of the questions that are coming in through chat, but we definitely will go back to those as well if they weren't addressed. It looks like Courtney might have dropped off. So now, Rose, we're gonna go. Oh, Courtney's back. Courtney, I'm gonna go to you next. I know you had your hand raised here for a bit, and then we're gonna go to Nell Rose after that. So Courtney, welcome.
Thank you. Actually, I think the conversation you were just leading kind of got into a bit of where my question or comment was coming from. I'll just sort of modify it because we live right past California Lane, so we're aware of that bottleneck and that juncture. And so just building on the other question, is there anything that we as homeowners along some of the stretches of Redwood can do to help lean into the, you can't see me, but I'm making air quotes around widening the road. It is a negotiated process of passing two single, vehicles different at key spots, and just we all have it. I think all of us have a general concern about first responders on their way uphill to an emergency, trying to figure out how to make that happen. And is there, I know you are at the beginning of your studies, but is there any sort of general guidance of what we as homeowners can do to help make the flow model work better?
I think, we're going to look at what infrastructure improvements are, feasible and achievable as part of this project as one form of approach. We also are going to look at, parking. And so, keep an open mind as we look at, the pros and cons of what that, any sort of modified layout or modifications will look like. Todd, I don't know if you want to jump in on any of that. There's some ideas being brainstormed, but really we're really at the very early stages of this project, so nothing has been decided. But yeah, Todd, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, if the specific question is what can homeowners do to help, make the process go as smooth as possible, the first and foremost, it's take as few cars as possible. There shouldn't be a vehicle leaving that hill that has an empty seat in it. That means, making some tough decisions. We see all the time people take every car in the garage because they don't want to lose their vehicles during a wildfire. But what you need to be thinking about is safety and thinking about the potential addition to traffic. So we encourage you to fill up every seat, get your neighbors. Carpooling is best when you're evacuating. It truly is. That said, the other thing that comes to mind is that the work we've done on the Middle Summit Fire Road, which is, if you're familiar with it, it's the fire road that leads farthest upslope on Christmas Tree Hill. We see that as a potential ingress point for fire apparatus during a wildfire. We are absolutely aware in the fire service of the risk of our equipment running into residents who might be evacuating. We've seen it already, residents evacuating prematurely in some cases, unnecessarily for small fires. It's critical to keep in mind that when a fire starts in the initial phases, that neighbors in immediately in that area are least at risk. It's the people who are in front of a fire that started miles away that are at the greatest risk. When a new fire starts on Christmas Tree Hill, we need people to immediately think about sheltering in place, preparing to evacuate eventually, but allow the fire engines to respond to that fire. We're very concerned that residents will take it upon themselves out of fear, out of potential panic, to get in their cars and leave the moment they see smoke or hear sirens, and potentially impede our ability to get to the fire quickly and extinguish it. If we can arrive at fires, in 5 to 6 minutes, we can put water on those fires and extinguish them almost every time. If we are impeded, if our access slows down, if we run into residents who are in their cars coming down that hill, it can slow our response and potentially allow the fire to grow beyond what we have the ability to control quickly. So that's a critical thought for you. That Middle Summit Fire Road does allow us a place that is not a safe place for residents to evacuate under any conditions. It probably never will be, just due to the nature of the terrain there. There's a reason it was never paved. But it is a place where firefighters who are paid to take great risk, and we have equipment that can protect us, can potentially access that hill above residents so that we can come in from the top essentially, and not block anybody who's trying to evacuate during a significant fire event. I hope that makes sense. The lower Summit Fire Road, which comes in about mid-slope, does have some potential in certain scenarios for evacuation for residents, due to the fact that it's mostly a level road. It's well graded and graveled in most locations. We've done work on both of these roads for vegetation management to reduce the risk of fire impeding those roads. We've reduced the risk, however, they are still much more dangerous than any of the paved streets on Christmas Tree Hill. So there are scenarios that we anticipate where, under certain weather conditions, with fires in very specific locations, and with guidance from law enforcement or the fire department, where we might open the lower Summit Fire Road and allow some residents to evacuate that way. You should never take that upon yourself unless you're directed to do that by a professional with our communications and our understanding of where a fire is and what it's likely to do. But that is something that we've considered, and we've already conducted for the last 4 years a tremendous amount of vegetation management work with that end goal at some point in the future in mind.
Great. Thank you for the question, Courtney, and thank you so much, Todd. I do see other chat questions that I think the team is doing a great job answering in chat, but team, definitely do raise your hand and let me know if there's anything we want to answer verbally. But thank you for your patience, Rose and David. Rose, we're going to go to you next. You should be able to unmute yourself. Welcome.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. And part of it's a comment. We lived up in Paradise for a short while and have long-term friends that were up there. And I'm acutely aware of these intersections coming down a hill. My friend sat in one of those intersections for like an hour with fire around them, and they still have trouble going through those intersections. It's just so anxiety producing, and I'm just really happy you're doing all you can, especially for these intersections that you know are going to hit. And it was a good point not to take all your cars, because that's our first instinct, is to protect our property. And that's a point that I think should be more widely publicized. And I also have a question. I was excited about the potential undergrounding of these power lines. Had no idea that would still leave up all the poles in the lines. Is there any way the city could help incentivize these other companies to underground with PG&E?
RJ, do you want to take a pass at that?
Yeah, I don't know. We'd have to ask around and see if that's ever been done, but incentives often mean, money, and we don't really have the funding to, incentivize them. So I don't know what other method would be, but we're certainly open to talking to some other agencies that have done these projects to see, if in fact the utility agencies did opt in, or what it took and how they went about it. But one of the things we wanted to kind of review today is really, are we all behind undergrounding for the, the safety improvements or the, benefits to reduce wildfire risk, or is there also a scenic component? And so it's, we're focused on safety. And so, interesting. We'd be interested to hear kind of where the community stands on scenic versus safety. So.
Thank you for the comment and question, Melrose. David, I see your hand raised next. Thanks for your patience. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
And David's with PG&E, so
oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm with PG&E, but I do live in Corte Madera, and I do know the Christmas tree area quite well. And so, RJ, you kind of answered that, but my question was that, are you going to, if there is no, I guess, funding through the PUC to either harden or underground, are you still wanting to pursue, there's a couple different options through that Rule 20 and pushing the A, but really the B, where it's sort of a collective neighborhood effort to do this. Will that be a pursuit, or are you just waiting to find out what the result of the PUC's determination?
Yeah, I mean, we identified the Rule 20 boundary kind of mainly at the base of the hill, and we're still committed to that. Unless we found that there was a better alternative and use of our funds, we're still committed to that in that area. Obviously, as we get further up into the hill and, outside of the project limits, that becomes, work that we have to do with our community, with our council, with our regional representatives to see, what is the likelihood of being included in those programs, and kind of, fight for, why we think this neighborhood is as high risk as it is. So we're up for that. But, as a town, we have limited funds. So we can either, as you mentioned, I think you're alluding to these other programs that are more private funded, if that was really where the rubber meets the road and that's what this community wanted, and we weren't getting the answers we wanted from PG&E on future programs or grants, that's something we'd be open to. But, that's, I think hopefully several kind of years down the path where if we haven't been successful in other ways, we start looking at that option. But for this project, we're focused on the portion that we've identified at the base, and potentially other system hardening improvements within the project limits.
Great, thank you for that. I did see one other question. I think the team is doing a fantastic job of keeping up with the chat and dropping comments in, our responses back in, many of which we've been referencing here verbally as well. I think a question came in from Sarah as a follow-up, which I think is about to get answered in chat, but whether fiber optic cable would negate the need for AT&T and or Verizon to have above ground poles. I'm not sure if we have a direct response for that, but that was just a follow up to the undergrounding topic that we just discussed. I don't know if Greg, if you had a thought about that. Oh, Greg, I think you're. Looks like we can't hear you again, Greg.
How about now?
Yep, thank you.
Sorry. So when we do undertake an undergrounding effort, we always reach out because we have this joint pole agreement with our telecom, partners that share the pole with us. And we ask them directly, we are going to go ahead and underground our lines. Would you like to be a partner with us and join the trench with us? And that's just something that we do. However, telecommunications, companies are very reluctant, and I'm not going to, put a wide brush over them, but they're very reluctant to spend that money to underground communication lines that might not cause a fire risk, right? They're all insulated. So they don't find there's a cost benefit for them to underground. And aesthetics, in Marin County, it's all aesthetics. We love our views. We have beautiful views. But for us as PG&E, we can't convince telecommunication providers to underground at their expense based on aesthetics, right? So I know it's kind of a harsh message, but that's pretty much, we do ask every single time, do you want to trench with us? And typically it's a no.
Thanks, Greg. And a follow-up from Linda on this undergrounding topic is if there's anything residents could do to really endorse undergrounding, whether it's through legislature or PUC or otherwise.
Well, of course there is, right? All of us citizens and customers of PG&E should be able to approach the PUC, the CPUC, and let them know of your concerns. Let them know why you think that Christmas Tree Hill, as a high fire threat district and someone that lives there is scared, should always be able to approach CPUC, PUC, and ask them why aren't we being considered for the undergrounding programs that you're allowing PG&E to move forward to. But again, it's not our decision, right? It's the PUC. We submit our general rate case. We ask for our high fire risk areas to be thought about and into our work plan, and sometimes things don't work out that way.
Okay, thanks for that response. Let's see. I think we've actually responded to all the questions that came up, and I want to remind you all again that we're going to provide a summary of this as well. Thank you for all the great questions. We'll put together a summary with all of this Q&A, including what came in through chat, and anything maybe we haven't gotten to, which I don't see anything at this point. So we'll be able to report back to you all as well. So you'll have that as a resource, as well as this presentation as a resource. And please let your neighbors know that weren't able to attend to also check out the video recording and that summary as well, so they can stay up to speed. I'm just going to pause here to see if anyone else had any other follow-up questions before we talk about next steps. Yes, Courtney, welcome back. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, not a question, and not sure if this is the appropriate moment for it, but very grateful for the the collection of sort of leadership and experts here for the work and the analysis that's being done. Communication's really clear. Feels like the what do you do in an emergency is a dialogue that is related but separate from what can we do to change the conditions on the Hill to be more ready and more protectable during a crisis. But just wanted to thank you all. It's very thoughtful and very helpful. And it feels like there's a number of things that we as residents can lean into to assist the work you're doing and the analysis. And, you know, all the way to, as some people have mentioned, potentially even being an advocate or source of funding for some of the outcomes that you recommend, but may not have the wherewithal as a community to, you know, pull off from a municipality standpoint. So anyway, thank you. And particularly Todd, really helpful, scary, but really helpful guidance on kind of what happens when shit goes wrong, you know?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate it, and definitely appreciate your time, Todd, as well, for being here and for the team. So with that, I don't see anything else popping up right now. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen again real quick. Just to reiterate that this is, as Nick mentioned earlier, this is the beginning of the process. We're going to have other opportunities coming up here soon to engage with you all. We did want to plug the website, and I'm going to ask the team if Quentin, if maybe you could drop the website address into the chat. But we do have a dedicated website for this where all the updates are going to continue to be posted, including this video of this meeting. And there's a QR code on the screen there that'll take you there, and or if you go to that link that will be in chat here momentarily. Thank you, Quentin. Please do that. We also do have an opportunity there to sign up for an email list so that you can continue to stay up to speed with project updates. As I mentioned, the video recording and summary will be posted there. And if you do have any follow-up questions, and Quentin, if you could drop that in chat as well, you could email staff directly. That's also on the website. If you have any questions between now and the next time we come together, that would be a great opportunity to do that. And we'll be back in touch with you all here soon with next steps and what's to come. And I'll turn it back over to RJ if you had any final thoughts.
Yeah, I was just gonna reiterate, really encourage everyone to visit the webpage and sign up for future email alerts through that. You know, we'll definitely continue to use social media, and we'll continue to use the you know, A-frame boards at the base of the hill, but it's unlikely we'll be doing individual mailers for every public engagement event. But we definitely wanted to do that at the very onset to really make sure we grabbed as many people as we could and get the word out. But yeah, and even if you've got a minute here, you can even type your email into the chat over these last few minutes, and we'll record it as well. So really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you all again for spending this evening with us, and we look forward to seeing you at a future meeting. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.